Okay. All right. So hi. Hi, everyone who's online.
Hello.
Hello. All right. So I was thinking, since not too many people are physically present, since we've come back to in-person stuff, I kind of get the impression that people want to stay online. No. So the people that are here want to be here, but the people at home, maybe a bit like me, kind of, oh, I don't really want to get out of bed today. I'm going to keep it like this, I think, because I think it is good to, get out of the house. And yeah, I'm actually, oh, Imon says he woke up late because he has bad friends. Hey, we've all been there. No, I was thinking that I want to cover the rest of this chapter, and then I want to cover the chapter on the neural correlates of consciousness. And then it's really up to all of you which direction we go in after that, because we could cover more material from the book, or we could get together and make this a proper seminar and have a sort of discussion debate about the big questions we've encountered so far. And I think one of those would be cool, one of those options. So I'll try to generate some ideas, what we could do to maybe get a little participation happening, at the end of the term, like at the very end. And yeah, I think that would be fun. I think it would be cool to sort of have everybody in here kind of discussing everything that we've learned, applying the ideas we've learned. So, even if you're going to continue to join from online, just be aware that that might be a thing that we do, right? So anyway, we're picking up from, let's see, I can't see my slide numbers, but we're on the experience of will. This was the slide that had the photograph of the table turning seance. Actually, that's a little. Yeah, I guess so. Wonder if I can close these. Well, whatever. Can you guys see okay? Okay. Oh, what? That must have been the sun. Anyway, so yeah, we kind of left off talking about the spiritualism craze in the 19th century, table turning seances like this one. Oh, hey. And we were talking about how Michael Faraday, who was the scientist, the kind of Cinderella story of Michael Faraday, growing up lower class, learned all his science, became a famous scientist. He suspected foul play in these table turning seances, and I think where we left off exactly was discussion of the ideomotor effect, which is when you move, but you are not, you don't have the sense that those movements are issuing from you, from yourself, right? And Faraday discovered this. He didn't discover the ideomotor effect, but he realized upon examining these special cards that he had devised that the ideomotor effect explained the motions of the table, right? So by putting the special rubber cement on these cards, he could see which thing had moved first, right? One's hands or the table. So yeah, this is kind of something that we still deal with now. I think I mentioned last time, other places where you'll see the ideomotor effect pop up is the Ouija board, dowsing, and in some of the experiments that we'll be looking at right now. Not this one, though. This actually deals with something else. Another case where action and intention, the intention to will, the willing of something to happen kind of decouple and weird things start to happen. This one's called precognitive arousal. And yes.
I just wanted to clarify, dowsing's the you have the Y-shaped stick and you use it to find water, but really your hand is just hovering there.
Yeah. Or sometimes people use L rods.
Okay.
Like an old coat hanger that's been made into like a right angle, like the letter L, and they'll kind of move like this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Some people will even do like this whole oh, it's so weird. But some people will even have like a pendulum. You may have seen that. Yeah, lots of different techniques, but all involve the ideomotor effect. And we've done this. We know this because we've actually done double-blind studies with dowsers and other diviners, right? So, but precognitive arousal is interesting. William Gray Walter was a neuroscientist. He also had a passion for robotics. This was the 1950s, and William Gray Walter had put himself together a pair of autonomous robots that were kind of like the Roomba vacuums we have today. They were very simple machines. He called them tortoises. Their names were Elsie and Elmer. Elsie could even find its way back to her charging port like a Roomba today. And all of this was done with very simple circuitry. But anyway, what he did here involved his stock and trade, neuroscience. He had patients. You know, you've got to come in, have some brain surgery. While you're here, maybe participate in an experiment, right? So Gray Walter plants electrodes in these patients' motor cortexes. And they're sitting in front of a projector during the experiment. So I'm sitting here. Imagine my screen here is my projector. And I've got a button that I can push. And I push this button whenever that I want to change to the next slide. Very simple. But unbeknownst to the experimental participants, the button press actually isn't what changes the slide. It's actually the activity in the motor cortex picked up by the electrode, right? And then the electrode sort of amplifies the signal, and that's how the slide changed. So the patients had this weird sensation where the slide changed on its own right when they were about to reach out and press the button, almost as if the slide projector knew what they were going to do, right? It would have been weird if you didn't know what was going on, I imagine. So this shows that under certain conditions, we can actually be in control of our actions without feeling that we are, like the ideomotor effect. This is not exactly that. This is precognitive arousal, but it's quite similar. And maybe if Gray Walter had continued to sort of tweak his experimental design, he could have found some other interesting things too, right? Like he could have experimented with longer times between the precognitive arousal, between the activity in the motor cortex and the pressing of the button. If he'd experimented with longer time, say 200 milliseconds, to bring it in line with what Liebe found out about the difference between the readiness potential in time, the readiness potential, and the conscious intention to move, maybe he could have set something up so that, you know, they actually had time to reach out and press the button, but it still would have been the precognitive arousal being amplified through the electrode, changing the slides. So we can be in control without feeling that we are. Same with cases of schizophrenia, right? Sometimes schizophrenic patients have this feeling or the belief that they're not in control of their own thoughts or actions, and that other entities might be in control of their thoughts and actions, implanting thoughts in one's head, for example. These could be aliens or the government or demons, even people they know, right? So this, you know, I can't really imagine my way into this, but it sounds like it must be quite disturbing, right? I mean, yeah. So maybe it can happen the other way around. We've seen the ideomotor effect, schizophrenia, precognitive arousal. We can be in control of our actions without feeling that we are. Maybe our brains can create the feeling that we've caused an action when we have not, in fact, caused that action. And that's what Daniel Wegner was interested in exploring. Daniel Wegner is one of those guys, he passed away a few years ago, but he sounds like he would have been an interesting prof to have. He was very interested in free will, taught at Harvard University, researched there as well. And he thought of the experience of freedom of the will, this sense that, I'm in control, I'm the author of my actions. He calls this the mind's best trick. So free will is an illusion for Wegner. And it's created in 3 stages. First, the brain has to plan and prepare to carry out certain actions, right? So here we're talking about things like the readiness potential or the precognitive arousal, right? And then after that, we become aware of thinking about performing the action. That's our intention. So this is unconscious and this is conscious. And the action follows the intention, but if they occur close enough together, we conclude that it was our intention that caused the action, even though the brain was planning and preparing unconsciously beforehand, right? So if you want to have an experience of having willed something, this has to happen in a certain way. The thought has to come before the action, and it has to be consistent with the action, and it can't be accompanied by other causes, right? Other causes might be like other external forces, having my hand moved by somebody rather than moving my own hand. This is a little off topic, but one of the reasons why I think Wegner is such an interesting guy is his experiments, like this one that we'll see in a moment, which is based on the Ouija board or the helping hands study. Has anyone ever heard of the helping hands study? It's actually funny. This is a real study that Daniel Wegner did where he had somebody play the helping hands game. You know that game where you stand behind your friend and your hands are theirs? You see it on like improv comedy skits and stuff sometimes, right? So they did this in an experiment to test people's sense of agency by having, the person who's not using their own hands, thinking about performing the action and imagining that they're performing the action while the person's other hands are actually performing the action. And by varying the time, between person one's intentions and the actions of the helper, we can kind of learn more about this, this series of actions, right? So anyway, psychology, right? This is something you can do if you want to be a psychologist. So Daniel Wegner and his colleague Talia Wheatley conducted another experiment. And it was, I didn't really use a literal Ouija board, but it was definitely inspired by a Ouija board. There was a pointer, or planchette as it's sometimes called in the game, was replaced by a board mounted on a computer. Kind of like if you imagine a computer screen flat like this, then you have a board that covers the objects on the screen. There are 50 small objects on the screen, by the way, all different. And the experiment tested, 51 undergraduate participants. This is something also that you'll probably become aware of, you'll become aware of it now because I'm about to tell you, but most research in university psychology departments is done on undergraduate students. Why? Because there's tons of you, and sometimes they'll give you marks or money or gift cards, so definitely, yeah, exactly. Do some experiments. It's cool to see how science is done from the side of the participant. I've done it myself. I've gone and been a guinea pig, and I've run experiments where I'm the scientist. And either way, it's fun. It is cool to see how everything actually works. So we've got 51 undergraduate participants, one at a time. they come in. Let's call the participant Dan. Dan comes in and he's paired with Jane, who he thinks is just another undergraduate participant, but actually Jane is what we call a confederate. Jane is a plant. Jane works for Dan and Talia. He's in on it, yeah. So Dan and Jane are facing one another with their hands on the board. We can imagine maybe I'm Dan, Jane's over here, this is the board, and we're Ouijaing our way around here. So they have to move the cursor over objects, and they're doing this together. They had to stop every 30 seconds. And each time they did that, they had to rate using a Likert type scale, you know, from 1 to 7, 1 being strongly disagree or 0, and 7 being the highest or strongly agree. You had to rate your intention, the strength of your intention to make each stop. Now, words are also being played through headphones that Dan and Jane are wearing. These words are, let's see, the words are of the objects that they're supposed to stop on. Then music would be played for 10 seconds, indicating that they had to stop. And it's in those 10 seconds that they have to kind of, you know, settle on something and form their intention to stop and so on and so forth, right? Dan thinks Jane is hearing different words in her headphones so that it's like almost like a fight. You know, maybe Dan hears swan and Jane hears car, and they're both kind of just moving, and we'll see where we end up, the swan or the car, right? But actually Jane is getting instructions directly from the experimenter telling her where to move. So in 4 trials, Dan's hearing the music indicating it's time for him to stop. And Jane is being told to stop on a particular object, like say a swan. Now, depending on the condition, Dan, the participant, could hear the word swan either 30 seconds before, or 5 seconds, or 1 second before, or 1 second after Jane actually stops, right? So, you know, Dan's getting, Dan's hearing words, and where the relevant keyword appears is varied depending on the condition, right? So this is kind of forcing a stop. This is Jane forcing a stop. In other trials, they didn't quite do it the same way, but the point is the participants would always, all the Dans would give the highest agreement ratings for the question, I intended to make the stop, when the word came either 1 or 5 seconds before the stop. So Dan's hearing the word, so it's 1 to 5 seconds before the stop, and he's like, oh, I think I'll stop on swan. But actually, Jane is moving the thing and stopping on swan. Dan's moving with her, but doesn't feel that way to him, right? Because of the ideomotor effect. So the lowest ratings for this question occurred when the word occurred 30 seconds before the stop or 1 second after Jane stopped on the swan. And this is an interesting effect that Wegner named the priority principle. So the priority principle says that effects are experienced as willed when the relevant thoughts occur just before them. In this case, 1 to 5 seconds before Dan stops, because Dan isn't completely willing that stop. Jane's being told where to stop, and she's moving the thing around and just kind of stopping on the thing that she's supposed to stop on, right? So yeah, this is the priority principle. Effects are experienced as willed when the relevant thoughts occur just before them. 1 to 5 seconds. And a question here. Oh, yes, I have to let Ben in. Hey, Ben. Yeah, no worries. Come on in. All right. You got enough room there? Awesome. All right. So yeah, that's the priority principle. And something similar may have happened during the table turning seances, right? That we were talking about. It could be the case that those people are all thinking that it's a spooky ghost or some kind of spiritual force moving the table. They don't have this intention at all. Yet they're, technically speaking, their actions are issuing from them, right? Because there's no ghosts moving those tables. So these are some compelling results. What Wheatley and Wegner have shown here is that you can have an experience of will even when you haven't actually exercised any kind of voluntary choice, right? And maybe similar things are going on when you see people cheering on a team, right? Like I don't know sports, but you know, people cheer at, like as if they can, like, yeah, go, as if that's going to make their team do better, right? Maybe this explains something like that. Or Wheel of Fortune. Used to watch Wheel of Fortune, and people would always, you know, clap at the wheel. They'd spin the wheel and go, come on, big money, like move wheel, like it, you know, and it's like, so you're willing, but it's not doing anything. You can also do things, but not will it.
Screaming at the golf ball right in front of the hole.
Yeah. Or, you know, there's any number of examples, right? But we feel that we can affect the world with our thoughts, you know?
This kind of sounds like prayer.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to go there, but yeah. Sigmund Freud called this the omnipotence of thoughts. It's basically like a kind of animism, right? Where we're looking at the world as a place that's alive in the same way that we're alive, and we have thoughts. So things in the world must be alive and have thoughts, and maybe we can affect it with our thoughts, right? And Iman just said in the chat that prayers and manifesting. Yeah. So go ahead, Tom.
Is this also kind of like how we manifest like luck or stuff like that? Like everything has a base chance of happening.
Yeah.
And then we kind of view like unfortunate or like irony and stuff like that as being explicit expressions of like chance, when in reality it was going to be like that from the start.
Yeah, like I think when people talk about like seeing signs,
Yeah,
you know, something like that, but also something like this is at play, but also things like confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is when you, when things are more salient to you, because they sort of mesh with your worldview or what you already believe, right? So.
My family is really big on like omens and stuff.
Ah, yes. Well, you know, it depends what you do with it, right? I think ultimately that's the question. What do you do with this? Like
with me, right? I found that generally speaking, I have like pretty good like just luck on things. Like for example, I had a presentation I had to give for another class last week that I was not prepared for, and then the morning of the prof was sick. Like stuff like that happens like, all the time, but there are places where I consistently have really bad luck. I am playing, and if I'm in any game of bingo where I am not playing with someone else, I will, and I have kept track. This has happened on a half dozen different occasions. By the end of the game, I will be one space away from a bingo in 4 different directions.
weird. Yeah.
Every single time.
That's weird. It's hard. I mean, and yeah, like we know that it's just randomness, but still it feels like there's something behind it.
I think I would chalk it up to the human brain and like pattern recognition.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a number of different ways we recognize patterns that can all sort of explain this kind of thing. A couple others from the chat mentioning, well, the law of attraction. Yeah, that's a good one. That's not quite like, I mean, yeah, I guess actually, yeah. The law of attraction is this weird metaphysical, like not real metaphysics, but like new age metaphysics thing. It says that like attracts like, which is also the opposite of, you know, what actually happens in physics, right? Where you have, you know, positive and negative are what attract. But the idea is if you put good vibes into the universe will respond and be nice to you, I guess, or maybe you'll get a house or a car. I don't know. It's, sorry?
New Age karma.
Yeah, basically, and that's the other mention we got in the chat, karma. But karma is different, sort like it's all kind of interrelated.
Yeah.
The problem is karma is an actual thing, that an actual object of belief in an actual religion, whereas the law of attraction is like new age
Yeah,
nonsense.
the law of attraction is also used by televangelists and it's to give them more money.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you give me money so I can buy a jet, God will smile on you, right? And I'm not even exaggerating that much, right? Like some of these guys have yachts and jets and cars, and guess Jesus is okay with that. Although there's something about camels getting through eyes of needles in there somewhere, right? Right, yeah. So, and rich people. So anyway, yeah, we can experience will when we haven't actually authored any actions, and vice versa. So in these experiments, free will seems to be an illusion, but does that mean that it doesn't exist? Blackmore thinks that the fact that we feel as though we have free will is not enough for us to form a conclusion either way. I don't know, I think I like Richard Gregory's take on this, which is we have free won't, right? I like that one. I feel as though there are sort of spheres of possible things that can happen. Like I have options, but I'm still quite determined in many important ways, right?
I mean, the sort of like the sort of freedom to have free will is like, I mean, that amounts to free will because, doing something and not doing something, are inverses of each other.
Yeah.
It's like, it effectively results in, what we would describe.
Yeah. Iman, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think we have like free will, but like it's very limited to what we can and cannot do. Like I don't have the free will to just randomly float and fly away or disappear, right? We're limited to our biology and what is actually capable of our being.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I guess there's a pathway that you're taking through life, but it's a very wide pathway and you can kind of move about on it as you would like to. But
that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I think of it as well. I think that's a cool way to think of it. So, okay, this is the chapter that I absolutely want to cover. Then we can kind of decide where to go after. Because we are actually a little ahead. We are a little ahead here. I don't think we'll finish these slides today, but we'll do our best. So the neural correlates of consciousness are something that we've mentioned kind of here and there all throughout the semester. Now we're going to talk about them in detail. So what are they? Well, how about before we dive into that question, let's do another thought experiment. Thought experiments are fun, right? This one's called Leibniz's mill. Imagine that you could look inside the brain and see everything happening there. We can kind of do this now, right? We have neuroimaging technology. We can use EEGs, electroencephalography, and we can see what's going on with the, changes in electrical potential at the surface of the brain, which is due to what's happening in the cortex. We could do a PET scan, where we inject you with some radioactive isotopes and they glow, and they don't literally glow, but we can see that on a machine. We can use magnetic resonance imaging. And if we use functional magnetic resonance imaging, what that does is actually uses very powerful magnetic fields to see where oxygenated and deoxygenated blood are flowing in the brain. So, and of course, the assumption is where the blood's going are the areas that are being used, right? Being used more than baseline. With animals, we've got single unit recording. We don't really do stuff that invasive with humans. But imagine that you could see an even finer detail than all of those. Imagine that you could literally shrink yourself down and, literally go and explore the brain. right? Would you be able to understand consciousness then? I mean, think about it like this, and this is Leibniz's mill. This was an argument against materialism, by the way. Leibniz says, in imagining that there is a machine whose construction would enable it to think, to sense, and to have perception, one could conceive it enlarged while retaining the same proportions so that one could enter into it just like a windmill. Supposing this, one should, when visiting it, find only parts pushing one another and never anything by which to explain a perception. Thus, it is in the simple substance and not in the composite or in the machine that one must look for perception. Yes.
I don't know why, but this being Leibniz, it's kind of interesting that like he also came up with Leibniz notation, which is a donation of fractions, when like here he's describing an indivisible fraction.
Well,
I
yeah,
feel like it's kind of similar to like the Greek division of atoms,
kind of, yeah, because Leibniz believes in these little things called monads,
Okay.
right? And they're not like atoms exactly, but they're, I guess you could think of them as like fundamental particles, like almost like the same kind of thing that an electron is, something more fundamental than an atom,
A
but
quark or something.
yeah, like really fundamental. So, and Leibniz thinks that there's, you know, everything is made out of this, and what's more, there's actually no cause and effect. It's all just a pre-established harmony, right? It's weird, right?
Yeah, there is no harmony going on.
Yeah. So it seems like there's cause and effect, but there's not. So that could be why, you know, the fractions and the whole, that whole thing. Yeah.
He also like, I was kind of wondering if that's in any way related to like holisticism, like he's insisting that everything's connected in a way. Not like it when he means that like everything has like a pattern or perception or something like that. More so that it's like everything can affect each other, and that cause and effect is like a continuous chain.
No, there's no cause and effect.
Oh, no. Cause effect.
No, not in Leibniz.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's all pre-established harmony. God says, I know exactly how the universe is going to go. This monad is going to go do this, and this one's going to do this. And it's going to look like they're interacting, but it's just pre-established harmony.
Okay.
You know?
What's even the point then?
Yeah. Well, it allowed him to tackle certain problems, but not others. Monads are kind of how Leibniz gets around the mind-body problem from Descartes, right? How
That's
does
the interacting particle?
Well,
the monad?
what?
Like the monad would be the interacting, because like in the mind-body problem, there's like no interaction.
Yeah.
Monad would be the,
But here there's still no interaction
okay.
because it's all pre-established harmony,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Everything's pre-established harmony. It explains everything, which also means it explains nothing.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Right?
that feels kind of lame.
Yeah, but so, yeah, and Iman in the chat says it's kind of like the idea of destiny a bit. Imagine destiny for the particles of the universe, right? If you want to think of pre-established harmony. So anyway, and monads are also responsible for perception and thinking, and you know, God is like the monad of monads. It's weird. So Leibniz, just you can see from his experiments, excuse me, he does not believe that by looking in the brain you could understand consciousness, right? If the brain is like the mill and we blew it up and could walk around in it, or if we could shrink ourselves down and go into the brain, Leibniz would say, well, if we could do that, we would not understand consciousness. We wouldn't find it. It's not like we could go, oh, there it is. That's consciousness over there. But, you know.
Wait, so how does he believe that everything is like predetermined with that consciousness?
God. Yeah, that's how they explained everything.
So he believes in consciousness more often.
Yeah, Yeah, Leibniz would probably say free will is an illusion because it's all pre-established harmony. It appears that we're free, or it appears that there's cause and effect, but it's all pre-established harmony, right?
So, in this instance, would like Leibniz say that like God is Laplace's demon?
Well, God is the sort of like,
Mathematical axiom that,
yeah, like God is like all the monads or the monad. It depends.
yeah.
I wouldn't worry about it.
I
You know what I
just
mean?
noticed like another similarity, and Laplace was a math guy and Leibniz was a math guy, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, and well, most people here did a bit of everything,
Yeah,
right? You know, Descartes was also a math guy, but he's also a theologian. They were all, the term Renaissance man, right?
Yes,
They were all Renaissance people, right? So jack of all trades.
Unfortunately, that job description did not include science fiction, right?
No,
nah.
although Kepler wrote some science fiction. Yeah,
Isn't he like the-
Kepler discovered the laws of planetary motion.
oh,
Yeah,
who is that shit?
that's Hubble.
Uh,
Yeah. But Kepler was a lot earlier. Kepler was before Newton. Yeah. When Newton says, I see far because I stand on the shoulders of giants, he's talking about Kepler, Galileo, Descartes. Those are the giants, right? So, but he wrote a story about trip to the moon. And this was in like the 16th century, 15th, 16th century. So he wrote a story about going to the moon, so this is even before like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is like the first proper science fiction story. So this is like even before that. Some would say maybe it's not really sci-fi because they use magic to get to the moon rather than a rocket ship, but
Can I go on a little bit, like a very quick tangent?
yeah.
Extensive discussion with some friends about genres of fiction, and we came to the conclusion that the only difference between science fiction and fantasy is how the story treats its own internal consistency.
Maybe, I don't know. Tolkien's pretty internally consistent.
No, it's not internal consistency, it's the attitude towards.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say fantasy, even though it might have a rigid attitude towards its internal rules, it doesn't portray it as rigid.
Yeah.
Well, science
so-
fiction, the rules could be mishmashed and put together any which way, but they say that it's rigid.
But it's kind of a setting expectation thing.
Yeah, I think you can find exceptions on either side though.
Yeah.
And then you've got like high fantasy, low fantasy, hard sci-fi, soft sci-fi. So it's
In the same conversation, we deduced that the Fast and the Furious series is a superhero movie.
well, maybe. Yeah. Okay, so Leibniz, forget about Leibniz. Identity theorists would disagree with him. They'd say, what are you talking about, Leibniz? The mind is the brain. The mind is just what the brain does. So if we could look at the brain and understand the brain states, we would be understanding the mental states because they're the same states, right? That's what identity theory says, is that mental states are identical to physical states in the brain. Mysterians would say, well, we can't understand consciousness by examining the brain. It's not that we wouldn't see it necessarily, but we wouldn't understand it. Mysterians are, who made up that name? I think it was Owen Flanagan, cognitive scientist named Owen Flanagan. He calls people like people who are still dualists or panpsychists, he calls them the new Mysterians because they don't really solve any problems. They kind of just introduce further problems, right? Like, okay, I want to explain consciousness. How does, really, I'm back at the mind-body problem, always. It's always the mind-body problem or the hard problem, which are really the same problem. I always keep bumping up against that problem. How does my physical brain generate the subjective experience that I'm having right now? And indeed, how does it happen that I seem to be an I? Right? And I'm having the experience. What? A panpsychist would say, don't worry about it. Everything's a little bit conscious. Rocks, trees, bacteria, your brain, everything's a little bit conscious. Your brain's more conscious because it's organized in a way where, that's its job. But all matter has some mental properties if you are a Mysterian, right? And dualism is the same kind of thing. I think if you're a dualist, you're a Mysterian. The extended mind theorists, they would say, no, we can't understand consciousness by looking at the brain, but they would say that because we can't just look at the brain, we have to look at the body and the world and how all of that stuff is connected up, right? So if we were to look for consciousness just in the brain, we'd be committing the neurological fallacy. Remember, the neurological fallacy is the fallacy where we attribute some property to or ability to a part of a system that is really realized by the entire system. So if I say, like, where in the brain does consciousness happen? Well, maybe there isn't a special place where it comes together. Maybe it's the entire brain. That's the neurological fallacy. If I say maybe consciousness is in this one part, or if you're an extended minder, you'd say, wait, thinking beings aren't brains in vats. They're brains in these weird robot fleshy bodies in this dynamic world, getting along with other weird flesh robots, speaking words out of their weird flappy meat mouths. And these words mean what their meat is thinking. Like, it's nuts, right? But like, consciousness is kind of a thing that happens across all of that. You need all of that to have a conscious being, maybe, right? Do you have your hand up, Zoe?
Yeah, I was, I had just pulled up Descartes' demon, like similar to the brain in the jar, where it says, like, there's a demon that is obscuring all your senses and trying to lie to you and stuff like that. And like, the difference between the brain body there, but like, I'm more inclined to agree with the extended minders because, like, I don't know necessarily if like the body thinks, but I feel like being a brain in a vat would be a very different experience from being conscious.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
something like that.
So it sounds like you're maybe like an extended mind kind of thinker.
Yeah, and it's more so just because, like, I also know that experience can influence a lot of those determinations of consciousness and stuff like that.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, people who like think in words versus think in visualization and actions, like, how do we distinguish consciousness if there's even the difference in that kind of level of thinking?
Yeah, yeah. Which again could be sort of the product of genetics and environment in some combination.
Yeah,
right?
I was gonna say,
Which-
like, I do know that often a lot of people, when they have like cognitive issues or like if they're struggling with something cognitively, or if they're having physical issues, they can like manifest in each other. Like, I know if I'm feeling ill, I'm clumsy.
Yeah,
And so I've always just thought that that made a lot of sense.
yeah. So yeah, yeah. I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
don't know.
the
Reading the bit where I forgot who said it, but like all kids start off as like
yeah.
realists.
Yeah, kids are all born dualists.
Yeah,
I
dualists,
think
yeah,
was
they are.
something that was said earlier in the book. Yeah,
I kind of like disagreed with that always because I found that like my body state reflected on my mental state very much.
but you're being a dualist right now, right?
Oh, yeah,
My
yes,
body
yeah.
state and my mental state. Well, careful, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cartesian materialism.
But then, like, at what point do you start separating body state from mental state, other than literally just the words that you use to describe it?
Well, that's what an extended minder would say. Like, we
Yeah.
just do this by convention, but really we have to treat the mind and the body and the world as this holistic, series of couplings, right?
Yeah.
There were some other hands up over here.
Like after the extended minders is like another material that you because it's seen the world like, so can it still be
Yes.
Is it almost like dual materialism?
No.
Like how there's like, well, but at the same time, it's not dual materialism. Like we are, I would say if it's dual, it would be the human and the environment.
Yeah, it's not like that. At least I don't think it should be understood dualistically,
Yeah.
because it's more like, man, oh, I need to come up with an example.
It's just like integration and everything.
Yeah, integration, like,
Can't be something like removed from your environment because there's no like external stimulus, there's like nothing for your body to act.
yeah, exactly. We are situated in
There has to be other things existing.
Odd brain connection, but like everybody's seen Avatar, the blue alien people movie, right?
yeah,
And I don't know why, but just like the brain going into a different body and the fact that like the characters like mood changes to and like his physicality and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And the fact that he like connects to the like physiology and culture of the world. I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting, but
yeah. And it gets back to the brain swapping question that we were thinking about a little while ago.
yes,
Like,
yeah.
would you still be you if it was just your brain or just the information that was swapped, or
Yeah,
would you be
I think
completely
they
new?
Do that in the Avatar movie? Didn't they just like download his brain and then put it in the brain of the creature, or did they remove his like, brain?
I think it was just,
Aren't they like in a scanner?
yeah,
I think
They're
it's the same.
they're monitoring.
But-
the current process. but
Yeah.
they're projecting it into another.
Oh,
But-
so it's like AI, like he's playing like wirelessly?
Basically,
Yeah.
yeah.
but at the end, doesn't he they use the tree to put him in the permanently?
Yes, yeah,
Right?
it's
Like-
been too many years.
I know, it's been
It's
forever.
Years, that movie showed up like once, and everyone watched it once, remembered nothing about it.
Yeah.
But got
Yeah.
really excited for the second one coming out.
Eh,
This year? Next year? It's my 30.
So next year.
So, okay, so different theoretical positions mean you're going to answer this question differently, right? But whatever your position, you probably think the brain is important for consciousness in one way or another. Excuse me. Unless you're Leibniz, right? Because it's all pre-established harmony, right? But when we look at brains, we just see the physical stuff. We don't see anything mental. It's not like we see consciousness when we, use a functional magnetic resonance imaging scan. And that's what Leibniz's mill is meant to show. Even if you don't believe in monads, or even if you're a thoroughgoing materialist, except maybe for those eliminative reductionists, you're still going to have a problem here. What do we do with consciousness? Where is it? What is it? So it's all the hard problem. But still, since we agree that the brain is important, we should talk about it. Because, we didn't always know that the brain was important for thinking. The ancient Egyptians, they practiced mummification, of course, right? Everybody knows about that. And they would keep the organs of the people they were mummifying in these jars. They're called canoptic jars, right? They'd keep your liver, your heart, your stomach, all your organs, because they believed that in the next life, you'd need all that. You were going to go continue living in the afterlife, right? So you needed all your guts and your organs and stuff. But what did they do with the brain? They just threw it away. Yeah, because they didn't think it did anything. Yeah, they thought the heart was what was really important, right?
I mean, in my case, the brain doesn't do it. I think that's
Was
what I
wet.
accept.
Maybe it just makes the head not hollow,
Yeah.
right?
I was gonna say there was actually a thought by like Romans who studied head injuries for a while that the brain was there to cushion the blow if you landed too hard.
It's so weird, eh?
Yeah.
But yeah, now of course we know the brain is important. But in a lot of ancient societies, usually the heart or the belly is considered the seat of thought and emotion and spirit. It's not until quite late that we start thinking maybe it's the brain.
I mean, I can understand that because
Yeah.
I feel that we have more feeling, like there's more somatic feeling in our like, torso. Than I don't feel a lot of things inside my head unless it's like a headache.
Yeah,
But like when it comes to like emotions and things like that, I like think about emotions, but it's actually like felt in your body. It's more nervous than it's like cerebral.
exactly. I don't think it's until we get to Plato where we really get an emphasis on this, right? Because before that, I mean, the ancient Egyptians had been around for a long time, even when they were old when Plato was just showing up, right? But Plato says like, okay, well, you know, maybe the different parts of the soul reside in different areas, right? So the appetitive soul resides in your guts, right? Which makes sense. I'm hungry. That's where you feel it, right? The spirited soul is, of course, in the heart, but logos, reason, is in the head, right? So let's discuss the brain. The brain is, at least so some neuroscientists say, the most complicated object in the known universe. So congratulations, everybody. You all have in your heads one of the most complicated things that we know about in the entire universe. So that's pretty cool, right? And it's enabling us somehow to do this. Like, wow, life is so neat. So it's very complicated. How complicated is it? It has 100 billion neurons on average. That's like as many stars as are in our galaxy.
Well, that 100 billion neurons in my head still can't wrap itself around the concept of radiance. So
Yeah.
Can't be that good.
Yeah. And not only that, billions of synapses. Synapses are connections between neurons. So billions of neurons, trillions of synapses, and each synapse is like a switch, right? Kind of. I was reading an interesting Twitter thread yesterday, actually, and this is not where I expected to find this, but yeah, there was some cool discussion going on about the mind as computer metaphor. You know, so I use it a lot, but after reading that thread, I thought to myself, you know, maybe I should always kind of preface this by saying like, it is an analogy. It is a metaphor. There are some ways in which this is not this, but there are other ways in which this is definitely a computer. So just keep it in mind, you know, it's a loose analogy. It's a metaphor. So 100 billion neurons, trillions of synapses, sensory and motor neurons all over the body. You know, that's your nervous system. Your nervous system is made of neurons too, not necessarily the same kinds of neurons that are in your brain, because there's lots of different kinds of neurons, but they run all over the place. They connect to your spinal cord, which is in your spine, which goes to the brainstem, which is, yeah, now you know. And it goes to the brainstem here. And that is the central nervous system, you know, the brain and all of that, the spinal cord, central nervous system. Then you got your peripheral nervous system. That's everything else. And there's more than one way of, you know, dividing this up, right? You also have your sympathetic, parasympathetic, autonomic. These are all different functions that our nervous system does, right? The sympathetic is, if I'm not mistaken, the sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. Yeah, and the parasympathetic is rest and digest. Yeah, so when we're resting and digesting, the parasympathetic nervous system is digesting and doing all that cool stuff. Here they are here. This is the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Ganglion, the ganglions are bunches of nerves. So you can see it all laid out quite clearly there. It's not too difficult, right? In the brainstem, which is kind of on the lower bottom of the brain, the bottom back of the brain. It consists of the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain. And don't worry about memorizing all of these. You don't need to do that, right? This isn't a neuroscience class after all, but it helps to know just how complicated of a thing that we are talking about, right? So we've got The midbrain, medulla, pons, or sorry, brainstem has the midbrain, medulla, and pons. What does it do? It controls a lot of rudimentary functions, things like your heart rate, things like respiration, things like sexual functions, sleeping and waking, right? Basic biological stuff. I guess what Aristotle would have called the nutritive soul, right? Aristotle also divides the soul into three parts. So we have a nutritive soul, a sort of, what's the other one? A sensitive soul, and finally a rational soul. The nutritive soul is just like growing, eating, reproducing, you know, stuff that plants can do in addition to humans. Yes.
I just wanted to clarify, like, once again, I never took biology, but is the nervous system like directly connected to the brain?
Oh, yes, yes. That's why we say central nervous system, because the brain and the spinal cord are really like one system. You can absolutely treat them that way. Yeah.
Okay, so like, I don't know, I feel like thinking about something like phantom limb syndrome.
Oh, well, we're gonna get to that, but
Yeah. Extended mind theory, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that just came in my head, so.
Yeah, but we'll hopefully, I don't know if we'll get to it today, but it is here. Phantom
Very,
limbs,
very
yeah,
nice, very
yeah, yeah. Phantom limbs are neat. Neat in terms of the neuroscience. I wouldn't want to have one.
Yes, yeah,
Like,
very
you know,
annoying.
I'd rather have an actual hand, but you see what I mean. So there's lots of different nuclei, groups of neurons. We call certain groups of neurons nuclei, right? So we have nuclei like the superior colliculus. So that sends visual information to different bits of the brain, namely the lateral geniculate nucleus, which is in the thalamus. See, this is why I said don't worry about memorizing this.
How big would it be?
Sorry?
How big would it be?
Oh, you know, not very big. Not very big. The ones like this that we can, you know, actually see are you know, like maybe like centimeters. You know, they're not large. There are other groups of neurons too, like cortical columns, which they're kind of different. I mean, there's lots of different ways in which the brain kind of gets itself organized, right? But nuclei are one of them, but they are quite small. So the inferior colliculus is important for carrying auditory information. The substantia nigra is implicated in Parkinson's disease, actually. So if you have damage or degradation to that area of the brain, that can affect some of the motor functions of people with Parkinson's, right? Ayman, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just confused why we call it nucleus or nucleus, because isn't that like the main part of a cell? I'm just confused biology-wise and naming.
Oh, well, it's just you just have to keep in mind that we're talking about a different kind of thing, right? So yes, you have the nucleus of a cell, but if you have nuclei in the brain, like you'd say like you'd say it here, the geniculate nucleus. That geniculate tells you that it's a particular part of the brain and not like the neuron or not the nucleus of a cell or something like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah, a homonym, right? Same word, different meaning.
Confusing.
So that's how I would think of it. What else? Oh, I forgot about the reticular formation. Yeah, the reticular formation. Pain desensitization. Yeah. So maybe we'd see larger or smaller reticular formations in people who have higher or lower sensitivities to pain. I don't know. And animals, this is interesting. Animals that actually don't have a cortex but have intact brain stems, they will still sleep, wake up, go back to sleep as usual.
Headless chicken.
Well, a headless chicken doesn't have a brain stem. You know, a headless chicken it's like, yeah, I mean, they don't really.
Well, there was like one that stayed alive for a
Yeah,
couple months.
there was one instance of a chicken. that
It-
lost
they-
its
I
they made
heard
a
of-
mistake,
yeah.
like, they're supposed to cut off the brainstem, but they cut off a little bit less.
Okay, then, yeah. But normally, if you do it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then they should die pretty instantly.
Yeah, I grew up on a farm, so
Okay.
I've
gotcha.
never seen, not like a farm, but we
Yeah.
had like chickens and ducks and things, and I've never seen a chicken with no head walking around.
Yeah.
I've
like,
seen a
the-
chicken with no
the-
head.
Yeah,
The thing we're referring to was like an accident in terms of like it wasn't supposed to happen.
yeah.
So,
Imad, go ahead.
I think there was this case of a child that was born with similar circumstances where it didn't have a functioning head, but it had a tiny bit of a brainstem, and the back of his brain developed so it could kind of function, like it
Yeah,
could interact with things around it or stuff like that. I don't remember how long it lived for, but
Yeah, I've heard of cases like that. Yeah. There are also cases where, we talked about split brain patients, where we cut the corpus callosum. There are also patients who have had hemispherectomies performed. So a whole half of the brain is removed and they can still live, so. It depends what was going on before, and
But
depends.
also like the age that they did it, because if you're young, then you can pre-develop a lot of the stuff, but if you're
Yeah.
older, it takes a while.
Yeah, exactly, because of neuroplasticity, right? The brain's ability to rewire itself. So yeah,
It's kind of interesting though, because like, you only have half of the stuff, like,
yeah, it is. It is interesting, like, what's that? Yeah, like kidneys, like you can live with one kidney, right? Like, so maybe that's why we have two hemispheres in case of severe damage to one hemisphere. Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry?
In certain cases, damage to one hemisphere can take the whole thing out.
It can, yeah, but even remember, like, think back to Phineas Gage, right? Who had literally had his brain impaled, and he was different afterwards, but still, he wasn't like, he didn't turn into a vegetable. He wasn't made stupid or anything. Like his personality changed, but that's because of where the tamping iron went through in his brain. It's that dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, I'll tell you. Antonio Damasio, a neuroscientist who's mentioned a lot in Blackmore's book here, talks about an interesting patient in his book, Descartes' Error, where this person had a tumor in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, same place that was damaged in Phineas Gage. And when the tumor was removed, this patient underwent many similar personality changes to those that were reported in the case of Gage. So, that's interesting. But if you have a brainstem, that's the important part. If you have a brainstem, you can still go to sleep, wake up. And we know that sleeping and wakefulness are important for our purposes here, because one sense in which we can be conscious is just to be awake, right?
So is the brainstem then like the most basic part of consciousness when it comes to like the whole process? Like, is that kind of
Well, it might be necessary, like Blackmore says. It's not everything you need, it's not sufficient, but it might be one of the things you need.
But it's kind of like the ground of the.
I would avoid, I don't know if I want to say any one part is the most fundamental part.
But if it controls sleep and wakefulness, if it controls when you're conscious and unconscious, it's basically kind of like a light switch where it's like.
Yeah.
In a waking state, we can maybe be conscious, or we're in a sleep state where we're less conscious. So without that regulation between sleep and wake, conscious and unconscious, then when the whole system falls apart, because then you wouldn't know when to be awake, when to be asleep. So like, and that's.
Well,
the part that controls sleep.
It's complicated.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Think of whales, okay? Whales, very complicated brains. Only one half of their brain sleeps at a time. So, yeah.
Okay.
You know, that's why, I mean, there are some weird brains out there,
Oh, yeah, dolphins, they do,
one hemisphere at a time,
yeah.
like a nap, like 20 minutes.
Oh, and it's literally 20 minutes too. It's not like 4 hours. Or
I actually don't know if it's exactly 20 minutes, but
It's 20 to 40 minutes, and they take naps of like 20 to 40 minutes on each side of their hemisphere brain. And then when they start hunting, they then wake up both hemispheres for like an hour, and then they go back to sleep.
interesting.
That's-
Yeah. So if you're a dolphin, then I don't know, but
You're gonna
yeah,
sleep all the time.
yeah.
Are we aware of which portion of the brain makes that possible?
Well,
And where the difference is, because at the base, that could just be a hyper evolved cortex, or, yeah, brainstem.
it could be, but
It's able to like diverse.
it could be, but again, a lot of animals that do sleep and wake up may not have nearly as sophisticated a sort of consciousness as we do or as a dolphin does. So they might be awake, but how aware are they? And what is their perceptual world like, right?
Fine, but like you can always build on that with more-
Yeah, you can build on it with more brains,
Yes.
which is, but yeah, let's just say tentatively that could be
It is.
a foundation, but I just think, because I think of the brain as super holistic. I don't know if it's like a building, it's more like a solar system.
If you think of it as, yeah, I guess, but if you think of it as holistic in a solar system, removing one piece of that gravity will make it go out of whack.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, well, let's bracket this because I want to tell you more about the brain. Okay, so this is what the brain looks like if we sort of bisect it, right? And this shows you the brainstem right here. So the medulla is here, that's the pons, the midbrain is here. There's some other things that aren't labeled, like you can see the hippocampus is going to be around here, the corpus callosum. This is the cortex, the neocortex.
What's the white part?
The white part? You mean the background or the middle? So
Is it like hollow?
no, it's not hollow. This is where the hippocampus is in here, the amygdala is in here. The thalamus is kind of between here and the cortex, and then the cortex is on top. I've got lots more brain pictures, so we'll see it all. In the brain, in way in there, you got your cerebellum, which is behind the midbrain, and what it does is assist with motor control. And then you have the thalamus, which is in between the midbrain and the cortex. And the thalamus is really important. It's got all kinds of relays in it, relays between older bits of the brain and the newer bits of the brain, right? So relays for sensory inputs like vision and audition, your sense of touch, all kinds of motor functions. And these relays are passing information along in these loops, these thalamocortical loops. And they might be implicated, they have been implicated in consciousness. They may be important for phenomenal consciousness. And they are pretty well developed in human brains. Okay, so yeah, the cerebellum is this is kind of an exaggerated brain stem, but behind the brain stem you have the cerebellum. You've probably seen it. Actually, you can see it here on this CT scan. It's right here. And then the thalamus is somewhere in here. So the cortex, thalamus, that's the hippocampus there, I believe. You can see it in a little more detail, although, yeah. The important part, or the most important part, I think, for our kind of consciousness is probably the cortex, which is the newest part of the brain for us. The oldest part of the brain is the limbic system. And when I say new and old, I don't mean like when you were a baby, you only had a limbic system and you grew a brain, right? I mean that evolutionarily speaking, the limbic system is older because the limbic system is something that's shared with more like rudimentary life forms, like lizards and amphibians and reptiles and amphibians, basically. That's why we sometimes call it a lizard brain or a reptilian brain. So amphibians preceded reptiles, which preceded mammals. So that's why we have different brains. The limbic system has a lot of other structures that are also implicated in consciousness. The hippocampus is important. for forming long-term memories and for representing cognitive maps. So, kind of next time you're wandering around the campus, trying to remember where you need to go, that's your hippocampus helping you. The amygdala. The amygdala helps regulate pleasure reward system. You've heard of the pleasure reward system, right? You finish your homework, you get that nice kind of bit of dopamine from your brain, and it feels nice. When you're done work, it feels pretty nice, right? Emotions, fear, look, basic emotions, things like fear, anger, happiness, surprise, disgust. These are sort of implicated in the amygdala.
I think I need to fire my amygdala against the one. It is bad at all of those.
Yeah. Well, it can always be worse. Psychopaths have underdeveloped amygdalas, and they have like a diminished fear response and kind of a flat emotional life overall, if you think about it. But yeah, that could be one reason why is an underdeveloped amygdala.
I mean, it's not bad at it on the basis of like, underuse. It's the opposite.
Yeah, fair enough. But neuroplasticity, you can always train yourself to train your brain maybe to like stop an amygdala.
But why would I go to the effort of training my brain now when I can just reward myself for the moment?
Well, that's the problem. That's the trick, right? That's how things work. Everything from chocolates to video games to drugs. It's all the pleasure reward system, right? Food, especially food. Food is awesome. When you eat a really great meal and you're like, that was great. That's that, And the hypothalamus regulates the autonomic nervous system. So things like blood pressure, right? Your heart rate. Sorry? I believe so. But don't quote me on that. Oh, the limbic system. There's a picture of it. Yeah, okay, here everything is labeled a bit better. Yeah. Oh, that's the cingulate gyrus. Yeah, the corpus callosum. Where's the hippocampus is down here, actually. Okay, good. Yeah, so you can see some of the other things we looked at. That's the cerebellum there. So yeah, that's a picture.
How do they know? Do they just like activate different proteins?
Well, the first ways that we would kind of distinguish between different areas of the brain was usually the way it looked. Not just, to the naked eye, but under the microscope, right? Like that's how Brodmann's areas were named, discovered and named. So Brodmann's areas are like areas of the cortex. So areas of the surface, and they're functionally specialized, like Broca's area is a particular Brodmann. I think it's what, 49? I don't know. But anyway, it's a particular Brodmann's area and it does a certain thing. And Corbinian Brodmann, when he looked at the brain with his microscope, slices of brains, he could see that the cellular architecture was different in different areas. So, and same thing here, like, the cortex has white and gray matter. And then in the thalamus, there's a different ratio of gray and white matter, right? And you also have, what are they called? Glial cells, I think, that are there to sort of give structure and support.
I don't know why, but the name of that cell being close to glucose, and glucose being the item that does the exact same thing in bread is kind of funny. Yeah,
I guess because glucose is sugar. You mean gluten?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, gluten, because gluten's the protein that makes bread springy and you can have the bubbles in it, right?
Imagine like the brain thing doing the same thing.
That would be weird. I wouldn't want, like, if my brain was bread, like, well, it would have I would have like holes in my brain.
I need that spaces to fit snacks.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's just cover this one last slide because there's so many more slides. But this is about the neocortex. The neocortex, over the course of our evolution, that is, has expanded a lot. You can see this when you look at, for example, Lucy, an early hominid, right? Very early, very early. Lucy looks more like a chimpanzee than a human. But as you go further in evolutionary time, that's what you notice, bigger heads and less hair, I'd say, overall. So that's because the neocortex was expanding. All great apes have a well-developed cortex, but ours is especially well-developed for some reason. So the large folded area that you see on the exterior of the brain, that's the neocortex. And outside, it's gray matter. Gray matter just means that the cells are unmyelinated. Myelin is a sort of sheath that covers nerves for protection, right? Gray matter contains unmyelinated axons. So the little branches that branch out and connect with other neurons don't have myelin on them. So they look gray. Myelin looks white under a microscope. So white matter, which has myelinated axons, is therefore called white matter. That's the difference. And then there's two main types of neurons in the neocortex. There are pyramidal cells, which are excitatory. They send signals. And then there are inhibitory neurons called interneurons, and they don't send signals, or they weaken signals. They're inhibitory, right? And much of the cortex is actually arranged in 6 layers. We have the layer on the outside, then we have these columns, cortical columns. They're vertical and they're functionally organized. And sensory areas are also organized hierarchically. Levels of processing build on one another. Neurons that do the similar kinds of jobs tend to be closer together. And no area of the brain is completely isolated from another area of the brain. You know, there are these long cortical connections. There are the cortical thalamic loops or thalamocortical loops, whatever you want to call them, which link areas of the brain through the layers of the cortex to the thalamus. There are things like spindle neurons, which are, you know, for those long connections, right? It's crazy. Ayman said it very well. He puts it really well in the chat. He says it's kind of weird to think that our ability of understanding and knowledge just comes from a bunch of cells. And yeah, you're right, you know, and apologies if I'm late reading this, but yes, this is the actual perplexity that Blackmore is talking about. How on earth does this brain thing do this? It's like for my previous class, I know that Ben and Zoe, you were in that one. You remember They're Made Out of Meat by Terry Bisson?
Yes, yeah.
Right? I recommend you all go and watch this. Just type in They're Made Out of Meat. You can read it or watch a number of different short films. But it's 2 aliens observing the humans, and they're describing the humans like, oh, they're made of meat. You know, well, will they talk? How can meat talk? Well, they blow air through their meat hole, and they think with their meat, you know. And the aliens are like, what? But how does meat do that?
It reminds me of the like simple rules allowing for complex things, like humans being made of meat. We all really just like all of our meat things do simple functions.
Mm-hmm.
But because we have so many meat things, the simple functions become complex functions.
Yeah.
Like the diaphragm really is just a big muscle that expands and contracts, and that's all it does.
Yeah. But because of where it is and what it does and how the lungs are.
We can create
And-
a vacuum, we can make
Yeah.
sounds, we can do so much stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. Because evolution is ultimately a tinkerer, right?
Mhm.
Not a designer, it's a tinkerer. Our lungs, a few billion years ago, our ancestors didn't have lungs. They had swim bladders. And that's what our lungs evolved from, stuff like that. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, so they're made out of meat, really good short story / short film. But let's leave it there for today because it is 12:56. Well, we only made it to slide 13. We've got like 47 more to go, or 37 or whatever. I can't do math, but we'll do that next time. I don't know if we'll make it through all of those, but we'll certainly get right through. And then maybe we'll try and come up with something fun to do for the last few classes.
Yeah.
You know, maybe some incentives for everybody to come on down and have a debate or something. You have a question, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is regarding the essay and reading responses. So essay proposal is due this Friday, yes, because you delayed it.
Yes,
And
yes, that's
then-
correct.
Does that mean the reading response is next week?
I'm gonna push it back further, but I haven't
Okay.
decided just yet. But for
Alright.
now, nobody should be worrying about the third reading response.
Kidokies.
Yeah, I'll make an announcement about that soon. So, all right. Anyway, yeah, thanks, everyone. See you later. Hey.
I don't know. Well, you noticed, but the reason why I was like silently dying of laughter halfway through the lecture is because when you were talking about how like everything goes back to the question of like the hard problem, and my brain was, yeah, and then that goes back to the question of where are we going to get some more mushrooms?
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that. Like, we've got this meat thing in our brain that, okay, I better say farewell and the meeting for